This video will provide an overview of compliance. Let's start by discussing compliance basics. Compliance is defined as a state of being in accordance with established guidelines, specifications, or legislation, or the process of becoming so. Compliance is adherence to specific policies, guidelines, or standards, which may be mandated by executive policy, such as an organization's security office, industry organizations, such as PCI-DSS, or government legislation, such as GLBA. To achieve compliance, a recommended and secure baseline configuration for hosts on your network needs to be established. Then you would confirm whether or not hosts on your network conform to this baseline. These baseline configurations are created and provided by the pertinent regulatory organizations. It is easy to check systems for compliance due to Nessus's ability to understand these pre-established configuration guidelines. Alternatively, you may create your own configuration checks that coincide with your organization's security policy. There are different types of configuration items you can use for a compliance baseline. For example, you may want to establish minimum configuration standards for password security, including password complexity, minimum password length, and password expiration times. You may also include configuration recommendations for hosts that are running services. Access to specific services may also be an item in your baseline configuration. Hosts on your network may contain files with sensitive information, so a recommended set of ownership and permissions may need to be applied. These may be appropriate for your compliance standard. You may also want to set a recommended configuration for system logging that occurs on your network. For example, you may wish to log system events, or you may want to ensure that when configuration changes occur, these changes appear in your system logs. In addition to using compliance to improve your organization's security posture, there are a number of industry or government compliance standards that you may be required to meet. These standards may apply to systems in the financial industry, energy and industrial, or medical, as well as U.S. government. If you are not explicitly required to follow a specific compliance guideline, you may use baseline configurations provided by a variety of other sources. Examples include the Center for Internet Security, the Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP, the NSA, and the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team, or US CERT. Various hardware and software vendors also provide best practices and recommended configuration guidelines. Launching a compliance scan with Nessus is similar to other types of scans. Simply create a scan policy with administrative level credentials and add the appropriate audit checks. After you have launched your first compliance scan, you want to focus on what are referred to as deviant systems. Deviant systems are those that are not meeting the baseline configuration as established by a compliance standard, regardless of the presence of vulnerabilities. After completing the scan, look at the percentage of the total population that is not compliant with the standard. It is important to look at the rate of change across time. During your first compliance scan, it is unlikely that all of the systems in your network are 100% compliant. If you launch a scan today, you may find that 50% of your targets are compliant. If you launch another scan 6 months later and find that your compliance has improved from 50% to 70%, you know that you are moving towards full compliance. On the other hand, if your subsequent scan goes from 50% of your targets being compliant to 45% being compliant, there is likely a problem in how hosts are managed and deployed in your network, and that issue needs to be addressed. In addition, you also want to confirm that your compliance standards are up to date. For example, your compliance standard may require that any MySQL servers must be running version 4.1 or 5.0. However, if there has been a subsequent release of MySQL, say version 5.2, you should assess whether your compliance standard needs to be revised to allow for the new software version. It is important to remember that compliance is not a substitute for vulnerability management. While compliance provides a good foundation from which to manage your security posture, your security management strategy must include vulnerability management as well as compliance. It is important to remember that while a secure system is more likely to be compliant, a compliant system is not necessarily secure. One of the potential issues with compliance is that organizations will adhere to a specific compliance standard, such as PCI DSS, but not engage in effective vulnerability management. You should be concerned with compliance for two primary reasons. First, many industries and government agencies require adherence to specific regulatory requirements. Second, by adding compliance to vulnerability management, you can enhance your overall security posture. For example, a fully patched database server out on a public IP address may not contain any vulnerabilities. However, a compliance guideline may advise that a properly configured network would place this server behind a firewall, restrict connectivity to it, and configure system-wide security settings to improve overall security of potentially sensitive data. Nessus provides a variety of compliance capabilities. Nessus supports both Windows Desktop and Windows Server compliance. Nessus also provides operating system compliance for a variety of Linux and Unix environments, as well as network devices, virtual infrastructure, and other equipment on your network. Additionally, Nessus supports auditing at the application level and supports configuration checks for common server applications and frameworks, desktop applications, antivirus products, web servers, and databases. Nessus also has content-specific compliance capabilities that can allow you to search hosts for sensitive content, including personally identifiable information, credit card information, corporate confidential information, adult content, and much more. Tenable's pre-written audit checks are readily available to customers in various regulated industries and include common industry-wide best practices, as well as vendor best practices and configuration guidelines. Many of these checks are certified by the appropriate governing body for use during official audits. For example, Tenable is an approved scanning vendor for PCI compliance, as well as a certified software vendor for the CIS benchmarks.